Hello, everyone. Hello? Okay.
You're good.
I'm talking about gaming and gambling, an introspective investigation through the lens of behavioral psychology. I think my copywriter used the business jargon generator to come up with that one, but we'll have to see about that. Yikes. All right, so a little bit about me. I got my background in professional gambling. I started about 10 years ago doing what's called casino bonusing. This involves basically depositing and taking advantage of deposit promotions at casinos online. The folks over across the hall at Derivco do some of the slot games, and I talked to them, and my favorite is Thunderstruck. And what's interesting is, so they made some remarks to me about how people have to keep their lights on. Someone has to pay the bills, right? They paid for quite a few months of my bills. Beyond that, I played some poker. Then, for the last about 8 years or so, I was involved in professional sports betting. And I do that through the current time. But here, I'm the founder of PlayWin, an esports enablement platform, and that's what I'm speaking to you about today. All right, guys, I'm going to take a poll real quick. Who thinks this is a game? We all know what this is, right? Beer pong? Okay, raise your hand if you think this is a game. That actually means raise your hand. All right, so everyone thinks it's a game. Who in here thinks this is gambling? Okay, spoiling, guys. We talked about this yesterday. Thank you for the heckling. All right, it actually is. So we need to clear up some definitions. All right, so in this talk, I'm going to use gaming to describe what we commonly understand as games. Video games, board games, even simple games children play, like running in circles, spinning around. In the context of beer pong, the game is throwing a ping pong ball in a cup. Gambling, I'm going to use in the context of this talk to be what we understand as gambling. Typically a wager or stake placed on a game. Slots, blackjack, poker, casino bonuses. All these things are what we're going to use as gambling in this talk. So in the context of beer pong, your stake is the beer in your cups, right? You have 6 cups, the other party has 6 cups. Then you play the game, you go through, you throw the balls in the cups, and that's the actual game element. And then the final part is the reward, like when you win a bet or lose a bet. But what's interesting is beer pong actually has a negative reward. The opposing party has to drink your warm, gross beer that's been sitting in those cups while you played. This is similar to some games like Ultima Online, where if you don't go back to your castle, the castle degrades. So rewards don't actually always have to be positive. They can be negative. And finally, so just to clarify what behavioral psychology is, it's the psychological study of influencing human behavior. Everyone in here has been to a supermarket, obviously. That's kind of silly rhetorical question I was going to ask. And the positioning of all the items in the store is an excellent treatise on behavioral psychology. Why do they put the butcher in the back? Why is all the food around the edges? Why is there gum and cigarettes next to the cash register? All these things go into the study of behavioral psychology, and this is a field that people study for decades. So, obviously, in my limited amount of time, we're going to cover this very briefly. Okay, so first we need to cover why I'm even talking about this. In the history of gaming, we started out in the past selling games. People had cartridge games, Commodore 64s, Nintendos, and original Sega. This led to things like Battletoads being developed, where that is a horrific game. If you create a game where 95% of your users can't make it out of the first level, you are a bad game designer and bad developer, and you should feel bad. The current model relies on retention, the freemium mechanics. So people actually have to play over and over. You simply don't cash out as soon as you get the money from them and they take the game home. So this is why behavioral psychology is important to study in game design, and we can learn some things from gambling and apply them into this. First, a quick note on ethics. What we call engagement in gaming is commonly called addiction in gambling. It's the exact same thing. And so let me give some examples of this. People commonly focus on the ethical part, specifically on the finances, whether it's too abusive to take money from whales in freemium games versus selling your game for $3. But they don't focus on some of the other ethical elements. Like, what about injuries that happen to players? People commonly play, everyone in here has seen Twitch and esports, right? Many players retire from wrist injuries. Is it really ethical for game developers to focus on just the financial aspects and not consider the physical impact? Some people even create games that are so engaging, like World of Warcraft, where people have heart attacks from sitting there and playing 48 hours straight. I mean, if we're going to talk about finances, we should probably talk about someone's health. But that's up for you to decide as game developers. I'm not going to sit here and lecture you about it. I do want to make a quick note about price discrimination. This is a commonly misunderstood topic. Price discrimination is where you go to the theater on Tuesday afternoon and it's not busy and you get to pay less for a ticket, right? You charge some users less than you charge others. In the context of selling games, this would be like a sale, a bundle. You charge your first users the most, who are the most engaged, but then you end up putting it on sale like a month later, and we get less engaged users and charge price discrimination. So this, in essence, is the exact same thing that occurs in freemium business models. And the final thing is we have a quote by Jonathan Blow. There's no other word for it except evil. He is talking about social games and World of Warcraft. I bring this up for two reasons. One, we should all be aware that Jonathan Blow is a moron. Two, if you actually agree with anything Jonathan Blow says, all the crazy stuff, this is probably the wrong talk for you. And I'll be totally okay if you sneak out right now. All right. So let's go over a quick behavioral psychological model. This is the hook model. So the first thing you have is the trigger. And this is what initiates everything. So the trigger needs to have two elements, one internal, one external. The internal element is what need is being solved. This can be something like a need for companionship, any sort of psychological need that's internal in your mind. The second is external. So you see an ad, or like you see someone else using Tinder, man, maybe I need a date. Second element, the action. The action is the simplest behavior to get a reward. The third element is the reward. I think we all are pretty clear on what's a reward. In the case of an RPG, you would have a constant reward, the experience. You would also have a variable reward, the loot you get from your drops. So it can be either variable or constant in terms of reward. And the final element is investment. And this is what recycles the loop. This is different from the reward. It's the loading phase. Let's go over an example that covers this. All right, so we have Clash Royale versus progressive slots. I think we all know what Clash Royale is. We might not all know what progressive slots are. I'm sure everyone knows what a slot machine is. What differentiates a progressive slot from a regular slot machine is that the prize pool for the jackpot gets progressively larger with each time you play. So in Clash Royale, you play it for fun. That's the initial thing. And user discovery is well understood. That's the external trigger. In a progressive slot machine, you're obviously going to a casino or other place where there's a slot machine. That's your internal thing. And then the external trigger is the flashing lights and all the design on the slot machine. So next up, we have the action. In Clash Royale, you play your battle. And then in the slot machine, you put your coins in, you press the lever, pull the lever, or press the button. So the reward is pretty simple. You get the items, you get your chest in Clash Royale, and you can open your chests. And then in the progressive slots, you get your prize if you win. What's interesting in this, though, is the loading phase and how or the investment phase, where they load players into the next step. So for Clash Royale, what happens is you get push notifications frequently. For example, if you forget to open a chest, you immediately get a push notification saying, hey, you forgot to open a chest. Then you get a notification later saying, hey, open the chest, it's ready. So this encourages players to keep coming back and into the cycle of constantly getting stuff. In a similar manner, progressive slots does this by constantly showing the increase of the size of the prize pool. If you were interested in the slot machine before because of the massive jackpot, and it increases a little bit with each time you pull the lever, you'll be increasingly likely to play. Oh, we're also moving into a little bit of an example phase in the presentation here. So we're going to talk about some Wheel of Fortune elements that are used in a variety of games. You can kind of see in the background the Wheel of Fortune from my heyday. I'm like level 74, pretty good. Best Fiends, Heyday, and Angry Birds Epic. Chris over here is the producer for Angry Birds Epic, shout So this is a Wheel of Fortune element that's used in Best Fiends. The Best Fiends element is actually kind of interesting because what they display is not always the prize you get, which I think is slightly nefarious. If you disconnect from the internet and the server doesn't update, you actually can get different rewards than what's displayed. So you might want to work on that out there, seriously. Next slide. Okay, and the next thing I want to talk about is a little bit about economics. Poker and daily fantasy have really interesting economics with them in that the best players are highly incentivized to take money from everyone else, right? This is how it works. There's zero-sum economies with a house take. And this is very similar to a lot of MMOs where people enter the economic stage of the game, the crafting, the trading, the looting, with the sole intent to break it. People come into Diablo 3 or Path of Exile, and this is what causes the hyperinflation of items and gems and makes the game unfun for players because they simply can't ascend in rank. We can borrow a lot of the knowledge from poker and daily fantasy and the things people adopt enable them in games like Diablo 3 and Path of Exile. Path of Exile has actually taken a very interesting approach in that they create like 3-month seasons. Path of Exile is an MMO, for those of you not aware, is an MMO that's a free version essentially of Diablo 3, where they have 3-month seasons. And so they fix the problem by limiting the inflation that can occur over that period of time. However, disabling the players who are the most abusive, the bots, the traders, the ones who loot extensively, is what really needs to occur. This can be done in a variety of ways. Segmentation, that's done typically in poker or daily fantasy, limiting the amount of loot one can acquire and hold at a specific point in time, putting caps on the amount of gold. One element, like one mechanic that could be done is by making gold a stackable item that needs to be stored in your inventory. And there's a variety of other things that can be done. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about mimicry. This is a behavioral psychology thing, right? So we have examples of positive mimicry. So when people first played Minecraft, it was essentially Legos Online. No one had any idea what to do with it. But then you saw people building entire worlds of Star Wars, building a Star Destroyer, building whatever they want, making entire mini-games in Minecraft. This is an example of how someone might not understand how to play a game initially, but then they can mimic other people. This also occurs with Pinterest and other types of image boards where they don't know what something could be used for until they see other people. However, this also occurs in negative circumstances. I'm sure some of us have all gotten into, played a game. Who in here has played LOL? How many of you were told to uninstall LOL? Yep, exactly. That's not really good. So what's interesting here is that there have been a couple studies done by Riot Games to actually solve some of these problems and the negative communities. And they use specific behavior psychological hooks in order to enable their community to be less toxic. So every time you manipulate your audience, it doesn't necessarily have to be negative. You can be improving the game experience. So let's not only view behavioral psychology in the sense of like, oh, what we're trying to do is monetize games better and get people to play our game longer. They actually did a few different things. So the first thing they did was disable cross-team chat. This actually changed the amount of negative and positive feedback that was originally like a 1-to-10 ratio to be 1-to-1. You specifically had to go into your settings and enable cross-team chat. So this eliminated a lot of the toxic environment that other people were using. The second is they enabled crowdsourced punishments via tribunals. This gave people community feedback, where the community became self-policing, and this also showed another double-digit reduction in the amount of reports and negative feedback that were handed out. The third item is they added reform cards to the crowdsourced tribunals, excuse me. This allowed negative players to get feedback on what specifically they were doing that was causing the toxic behavior and why they got banned. Instead of just being angry and not understanding why they received a ban, they received specific elements from their chat on what caused the ban. And the final was they used some multivariate testing to show tips before. They put them in different colors, different types of display, and they used this to influence their player behavior. Some of the things that were kind of interesting from this, though, were comments that encouraged players, like who could be the most sportsmanlike, actually turned out to have a negative effect where people would have more reports, specifically because people saw negative behavior and then they reported it. because they were trying to make themselves seem like they were the best, most sportsmanlike. So some of these had negative effects, and it's very interesting, but this is something you can implement with your communities and how influence their behavior. So we finally get to the Angry Birds epic slides. So this is a good example. If you show up places and talk about your game long enough, I will eventually play it, and I will use it as examples in my own talk. Thanks, Chris. All right, so 3 elements: Wheel of Fortune, luck-based crafting, and dangling. All right, so here we've got the loot you get after you win a battle. You can see my little birds over there. These are actual screenshots of me playing. I was beating the golden pig. So this has a constant element where the amount of rewards you receive is attached to the stars in your performance. The variable is the wheel. Next, they have luck-based crafting. Here is, I got 3, so they roll a die, and I got 3 stars. So I gained 4 of, I don't even know what this is, my snow cannon apple juice or something. Yeah. All right, so luck-based crafting, another element that adds in like a gambling type aspect where you're not really sure of variable rewards. People typically respond a little bit better to this than constant rewards. And the final element is dangling. So Piggy McCool gives you free stuff every day. And obviously people love getting free stuff. So they come and check out Piggy. And Piggy is not fully loaded up. I actually just realized this yesterday. However, he's got a bunch of these little things. So the potion pot is actually a gold potion pot, which is a durable freemium upgrade. He does have the diamond anvil, and then he also has got the golden rage chili that fills up his rage chili from the very beginning. So you're continually reminded of these extra benefits you can have in the game every time you get your free stuff from him. And simply showing this to players provides an impetus. They're like, man, I really want that. Man, I really want that. But they never know they want that until you show it to them. All right, and so the next game I'm going to talk about briefly is ZT Online. So this is a game from the mid-2000s. It's a Chinese game. It's an MMO. It's similar to Ultima Online. However, when you do behavioral psychology, you can't just make qualitative assumptions about your audience. You actually have to do the quantitative analysis and study how people respond. Well, okay. I'll just keep talking. He tells me it will be fixed. Not to worry. Apparently he was right. All right, so ZT Online, the real thing that happened is since it was a Chinese audience and Eastern audiences respond differently to monetization than Western audiences, the game essentially became a pure pay-to-win game where no one actually did anything that you'd normally do. So no one would go like on raids, or they wouldn't farm things, they wouldn't craft things. All they would do is go into this chest where they had to pay real money to open the chest and just open chests repeatedly to get loot. Then they would have things like clan wars. And then they implemented this on top of clan wars, where you could add extra HP to your castle when someone was trying to attack it via paying money. And then to cause more damage in your attacks, the other party would pay money. So essentially it became just a game where who could put the most money in won. Obviously this would not really work on a Western market. But I bring this up because we never really study how Eastern audiences work, what type of games they play. Your monetization needs to fit. And the last one is Cookie Clicker. So this is the purest implementation of behavioral psychology in a game. And I have no idea why people play these. I personally do play these on occasion. And I don't know why. I think it appeals to like the darkest self-loathing in all of us. But the core loop in this is you click it, right? And then the reward is the counter that's increasing on the screen moves up even faster. And then you click. There's no investment. You just keep clicking. This is essentially Diablo without all the extra bells and whistles. It's probably the purest form of it. If we really distill the game down to its core loop, you just click around. But so behavioral psychology can take extremely simplified forms in games. And that's all. Thanks for listening today, folks. Does anyone have any questions? If you feel nervous asking questions in public, the coffee break is after this, and you can find me and ask me specifically. Please do not ask me any Angry Birds specific questions. Chris handles all of those. I don't want to say anything awkward.
Where do you think the study of
No.
neuropsychology and this kind of thing will play into how gaming is developed in the next years?
Neuropsychology meaning the study, so I honestly don't have an opinion on that. Yeah, I'm not even going to make something up.
Oh, come on, you can do it. Shoot
Oh,
from
I
the
mean,
hip.
it's obviously going to play a part, right? But I'm not an expert on neuropsychology. Whether you're talking about the scientific, like the analytical side, that involves like chemicals in the brain and studying the chemicals release and how different people respond to that. Awkward. Yeah, I think it's being studied. It's a burgeoning field of research. And then but the takeaway from game designers and what they can study in something like that is just simply how general audiences respond and how your audience is subdivided into that. Like who's actually playing your game? You got to figure this out before you can actually implement anything psychological in your game, right? Yeah.
Garrett,
What's up?
how are you using this stuff in PlayWin?
We don't. Well, we don't design games. So how would we actually implement it?
Well, you
Right.
might give feedback to developers.
I do give feedback to developers, but that's proprietary.
Right, I've been told.
Well, I mean, so if I was working with you on your game and I had all these great ideas, would you want me to just like publish them to everyone else who had a similar game in the same genre so they could adopt all the awesome things that you worked on and told me when we were having a personal conversation? Obviously not. That would be what's called dick.
And on that note, thanks for your presentation.
No problem.